So the first thing I want to do is talk about what is this term, the adjacent possible. So it's I think, again, I can't remember whether in the stuff that was sent out, there was an explanation of this. The adjacent possible is a phrase that was coined by a biologist, an American biologist called Stuart Kaufman, who's written books about this idea. And it was made popular or made more noteworthy by the writer Stephen Johnson. And what I'm going to do now is show you a slide where Stephen Johnson tries to sum up this idea of the adjacent possible. And if you can't be bothered reading that, or if it's too small, I'll read it out to you, because it's worth just getting the hang of this, because it's kind of right at the core of what I want to talk about today. So in any system, so he's kind of paraphrasing Stuart Kaufman here. In any system that's evolving over time, whether it's a biological system or a cultural one, and I should say that Kaufman uses the adjacent possible essentially as an explanation of evolution. Okay. So at any given point in that evolution, there are a finite set of ways that the system can be changed and a much larger set of changes that can't be made. Think of the pieces of a chessboard halfway through a game of chess. There are a finite set of moves that are possible at that moment in the game, given the rules of chess, and a much larger set that cannot be made. The set of moves that you can make define the adjacent possible at that moment in the game. So, in a very crude terms, right at the beginning of a chess game, if you can't checkmate someone with your first move. Okay, so checkmate is not in the adjacent possible. But I think there is it fool's mate or something that you can do within about 3 moves or something? But in the first move, it's not in the adjacent possible. If you think in terms of technology, there was simply no way to invent a microwave oven in 1650, the year 1650. However smart you might be, but somehow in the middle of the 20th century, the idea of a microwave oven became imaginable and became part of the adjacent possible. So I think when Kaufman talks about this in terms of evolution, he makes this, what seems like a very obvious point, when we had the very earliest life forms developing on planet Earth, however many, 5 billion years ago, single cell organisms at the bottom of the ocean. You couldn't jump from a single cell organism at the bottom of the ocean to like a zebra in one step. It took many billions of years of individual changes until the zebra became in the adjacent possible. So that's what Stuart Kaufman means. And I quite like this idea of the adjacent possible as something that people working in NHS improvement can borrow, because there are certain aspirations that we can have for a system that we want to improve, which are clearly not in the adjacent possible, because they're too almost too utopian, too pie in the sky. It's like if you look at 4-hour compliance to take a patient flow metric at the moment in NHS England and NHS Scotland, it's probably hovering about, I don't know, 60% or something for most acute hospital trusts, maybe 65%, I don't know. And the idea that we could achieve 95% by the end of June for the vast majority of hospitals, it's not in the adjacent possible. Okay, but we might be able to get it up by 2 percentage points. That's the idea. And one of the things that I'm keen to look at is whether there are improvements that are in the adjacent possible, but we don't know it because we haven't gone looking for them. So that's effectively the gist of what I want to talk about today. So improvements in patient flow in acute hospitals, in my sort of way of looking at the world, are almost always bound up with reductions in length of stay. It seems to me that the fundamental problem that we've got in patient flow is too many beds that are too full and not enough beds that are empty. And the fundamental problem that we've got there is that they're there because effectively patients are staying too long. Now, that's not a clinical view. That's an analytical definition of too long, not a clinician's view of too long. Clinicians are saying, no, they're not staying too long at all. In fact, if anything, we're getting pressurized to discharge them before they're ready to be discharged. I'm saying that if the number of beds that you've got is fixed and finite, that the thing that's causing the problem here is usually that. It's either that or it's the number of admissions. So let's have a look at, let's just jump these. I'll come back to these slides in a second. Let's have a look at a specialty that I'm going to use as my example today. And let's have a look at what having a length of stay that's too long looks like. So we've got a specialty here, which I cannot remember whether I think it was general medicine, like a downstream general medicine example that I got. and it's from a couple of years ago. So the whole thing is anonymous, so it doesn't really matter. But this is a specialty that over the course of this, I think, and again, I think it was a 10-month period rather than a 12-month period, just to complicate matters. But anyway, it was dealing with, on average, 10.6 admissions a day. Its average length of stay was 9.6 days. And if you multiply those two numbers together, you get 102.6. You won't get that exactly because I think the real numbers underneath are something like 10.635 and 9.621 or something like that. So, but they do add up to 102.6. They do multiply to 102.6. So that's how many beds on average this specialty was occupying. So let's just go back to the Little's Law theory here. So most of you will already be familiar with this because it's kind of a sort of fundamental bit of operational research knowledge that most of us have got kind of tucked away somewhere in our brains. But Little's Law, L equals lambda times W. So when you see it in Wikipedia, it all looks a bit forbidding. The long-term average number of customers, L, in a stationary system is equal to the long-term average effective arrival rate, lambda, multiplied by the average time that a customer spends in the system, W. And it's like one of those sentences that, if you're like me, you've got to read it about 16 times and translate customers into patients. Let's have a go at translating it into patients and something that's a bit more user-friendly. So the way that I do is I kind of turn the equation around. So it's lambda, instead of it being lambda equals, sorry, L equals lambda W, I say lambda times W equals L. And lambda is how many, so the long-term average effective arrival rate. So the number of admissions per day. So that was the 10.6. How long is the average time that a patient spends in the system? So that's 9.6 days. And then how full, which Little's Law defines as the long-term average number of customers or patients in a stationary system. That's on average how many beds are being occupied by general medicine patients in this hospital. So that was the 102.6. How many multiplied by how long equals how full, and there are the numbers. 10.6 multiplied by 9.6 equals 102.6. So that takes us to this kind of way of understanding the world. And what I wanted to try and do is think about how a specialty might go about looking at its data in some sort of forensic way to try and make things better than this. So what I haven't told you yet about this specialty is that it's got a bed allocation of 100, right? So it's trying to fit this activity into a bed envelope, if you like, of 100 beds. So it's got an average bed occupancy of 102.6%, which is obviously, so it's overflowing. It's having to borrow beds from other specialties, which again is a normal thing that happens in general hospitals. And that's creating all sorts of suboptimality in its own right. So supposing the clinical director of this specialty wants a conversation with their colleagues to say, look, is there anything we can do about this? In particular, is there anything we can do about length of stay? And one of the things that they say to you is, what about if we look at the average length of stay numbers for each of the individual consultants that makes up this specialty? Right. Now, what I've done in this example, I've simplified things to try and get rid of the kind of gnarly data quality issues. So what I'm doing is I'm assuming that this specialty is made up of, it's got 15 consultants, okay, working within it with differing caseloads, but they've all got reasonably substantial caseloads. I think the cutoff point was something like, I think anyone who has a workload of less than 100 was excluded from this analysis. So these numbers reflect that. Okay, and what this clinical director says is, let's have a look at a league table. So at the moment, this is just a conversation between the clinical director of this specialty and the data analyst. And they say, show me the league table of average length of stay. So you do it, and it's not, you don't posh it up or anything. You just leave it as a kind of unvarnished pivot table. So just ignore the high or low thing at the top. That's just to confuse you and to whet your appetite for what's going to come. So we've got anonymized consultant codes down the left-hand side. I've no idea how I derived those anonymous codes, but that doesn't matter. They're just anonymous codes. We've got a measure of their workload in the middle column. So that's the number of discharges that that were attributed to them over that 10-month period. And again, I followed the lead of the clinical director who said, when a patient changes consultant in the course of the stay, what I want you to do is use the, when it comes to attribution, who was the consultant at the point that they were discharged. So that's what I've gone for. Although the vast majority of them actually remained under one consultant throughout the whole process, so that wasn't too problematic. And then in the third column, we've got the mean length of stay. So you can see that down at the bottom, we've got 9.64. So that's the average. That's the number that was going into the to those blue squares a couple of slides ago. And that 3246, which is the workload, if you divide that by however many days there are in a 10-month period, that comes to I think it's like 10.6 admissions a day or something like that. So that's how those numbers arrive. One of the things that the clinical director says is, crikey, that's quite a lot of variation. The clinical director has already, before they looked at this table and before they asked you to do this, they've already sort of ascertained from their own clinical experience that these 15 consultants are comparable in terms of their length of stay. Because the way that patients get allocated to consultants is basically just the cab rank principle. So, it's like they're on for a 24-hour or a 48-hour period or whatever it is, and they get whoever comes in that period. So they're satisfied that that's not a problem. They might want to check that a bit later on, but for the moment, we've got comparable case mix, but we've got quite a lot of variation. So the lowest, I think, on there, it's not arranged in order exactly, although it's kind of. I think the lowest is 6.7, which is consultant 66, and the highest is the one at the bottom, isn't it? It's consultant 82, 14.52. So there's a more than twofold difference in terms of length of stay difference. But she says, this is the clinical director speaking, let's put a margin of error in here. So let's draw a caterpillar plot. Because if we're going to present this and talk to these consultants about it, what I really want to do is demonstrate that we recognize that there's going to be some of this variation is going to be due to sampling error. So what we've got here are the 15 consultants arranged in length of stay order, in descending order from the highest length of stay, or the longest, I should say, on the left to the shortest on the right. And then the black horizontal line going through the middle of them is the 9.6, which is the average of the whole lot of them. And what the consultant the clinical director sort of homes in on. So again, this is just a conversation between you and her at this moment. Says that what's interesting is that there are clearly two consultants 82 and 81, and you can't see this because it's so close. But actually, consultant 77 is also statistically significantly higher than the mean. What we've got here are three consultants, 82, 81, and 77, who've got a length of stay that is not just higher than the mean, but it's statistically significant. So the standard error calculation is supposed to take care of the sampling error and all the rest of it. And what intrigues her is the idea that that is a glimmer of the adjacent possible, right? Because if those three consultants could somehow be brought into the herd and they had length of stay that were closer to the average, then that would bring the average down. And I think the way that she's thinking is, well, hang on a minute, 12 of these consultants, if we were to take the average of those, that would be quite a bit lower than 9.6. So we've got this glimmer of the adjacent possible. But she said, before I present this to these consultants, I'm going to take a leaf out of David Spiegelhalter's book. So this is a thing that I often talk about when I'm teaching people about presenting sort of comparative data. So about 20 years ago, maybe longer than that now, 2004, 2005, it was like David Spiegelhalter ran a sort of one-man campaign to try and introduce the NHS to funnel plots, because he said that caterpillar plots, although they show margin of error, tick, that's good, they still league tablize the data, which creates bad blood even before you started. So let's recast this as a funnel plot. So that's the same data effectively, but I've now got red dots instead of blue dots. So it's the same 15 consultants. That black horizontal line is still at 9.6. So we're measuring average length of stay in days, still at the vertical axis. But what we've got on the horizontal axis is the measure of workload. So the further to the right the red dot is, the bigger that consultant's workload was in that 10-month period. So you can see there's a consultant over there with just over 350. And then we've got a consultant, two consultants over on the left with workloads of about 120 or something like that, 115, 120. But the key thing is that what this funnel plot also shows is that we've got three consultants. You can see that three of those red dots are above the upper control limit. I've calculated the upper control limits as 95%, simply because I'm kind of just going with sort of with kind of medical convention as opposed to statistical process control convention. I'm aware that generally speaking with SBC, we do like 99.7% control limits, but I think what I find is that doctors in general tend to be more comfortable with 95%. So we've got these three. And one of the things that the consultant said, the clinical director says, is what if we were to take those three consultants who were above the control limit out of the game, and we were to recalculate the length of stay based on that. So what I'm going to do now is do that with a bit of juxtaposition. So I've taken that same graph, put it on the left, and now I'm going to take those three consultants at the top out of the equation and recalculate length of stay. Are you ready? This is a ta-da moment. There we go. So instead of having 15 consultants, we've now got 12. So the scales on both of these graphs are identical. So 0 to 16 days on the vertical axis, 0 to 400 on the workload, the discharges axis. The red dots are all in the same place, except that we've taken three of them out of the game. But the black line and the two control limits have both dropped a bit. So you can now see that the black horizontal line has come down to 8.9 days because we've taken those three long stay consultants out of the game. And that's, again, it's made that sense of the adjacent possible a bit more solid for this clinical director. So remember that towards the beginning of this presentation, I showed you those three squares, and we had 10.6 admissions per day, average length of stay of 9.6. Multiply them together, it comes to 102.6. And now she's got this glimmer of, but if we could get all 15 operating like these 12, then that could come down to 8.9. So we've got that possible, we've got this adjacent possible. So if we now go back to those Little's Law numbers and create an adjacent possible column next to the specialty actual column, the number that we've replaced there effectively is the 9.6 with the 8.9, and that gets us to 94.8. So it's not we haven't got to some kind of amazing it's not the sunlit uplands really, because that's still 94.8% bed occupancy. That's still going to lead to exit block for patients leaving the emergency department or patients leaving the acute medical unit, wherever this specialty gets its patients from. But it's going to be a lot less exit block than there was before. Okay, so that's going to yield an improvement in patient flow, and that's going to have an impact on the system. And that drop in length of stay, 9.6 to 8.9, is a 7.5% drop. And the fullness obviously also drops by 7.5%. So, not to be sniffed at. And it just seems to me that if we look at this data in this way, then these sorts of possibilities become open to us. Now, what I've got is 4 issues that emerged from this. So what I'm describing there is a kind of generic case study based on actual data that's been a little bit kind of, sanitized for the sake of getting rid of some of the gnarly complexities of it. But the gist of it is accurate. And it's also, what I've also done is I've kind of combined a few personal experiences I've had speaking to clinical directors in different hospitals about people's attitudes towards comparing consultants' workloads like this. And there are these 4 issues that emerge from these conversations that I've had. And again, I want to raise these with you and then also see if you can come up with any that you want to add to this. So just spend about 5 minutes talking about these things. So the first bullet point I've already alluded to. And I was just, when I was writing these bullet points down, I just was gobsmacked by my own alliteration there, because like the comparability of consultant case mix complexities, it's almost poetry, isn't it? But anyway, it seems to me that you can't do this, and I think most of you, if not all of you on the call, would recognize this, unless you've got some kind of guarantee, if you like, from the clinicians that these are comparable. And that's not in this particular example. It was relatively straightforward because it was the clinical director of that particular specialty. Many years experience says yes, it is, because I know how this works. But you can't go in as an analyst without getting that clinical view. Otherwise, dragons lurk. Right. So that's the first thing. The second thing is balancing measures. So one of the things I didn't do with this, but which I think you should do before you show it the light of day, is it would be very embarrassing, wouldn't it, if those three consultants that we've sort of that we took out of the equation because their length of stay was too long, in double quotes, but it turns out that they were the stars when it came to 30-day mortality and 30-day readmission rates. So I've just picked two balancing measures at random there, but these are ones that people quote. Because if it turns out that those three consultants happen to be the 3 out of the 12 that were statistically significantly better than their 12 colleagues on those, then again, you'd have to kind of abandon ship on this particular thing. But if it turns out that they weren't, and that their 30-day mortality and their 30-day readmission rates were just, average, then, go ahead. The third point is to do with like a statistical point that sometimes gets raised. So when you're presenting data to teams of clinicians, it doesn't take long before people come up with statistical queries. And one of the problems that we've got, point 3, so I've got a slide for this. If I go to the underlying length of stay distribution, so when you look at the all of those 3,200 and whatever it is, 246 length of stays in that 10-month period, and you break it down as a frequency distribution, you realize that the length of stays are absolutely not normal. Okay, it's a kind of exponential distribution, and that therefore there are some warning signals start to arise. So when I was calculating the confidence intervals and the control limits, I was using standard error. Now I was using that kind of advisedly, in the sense that the textbooks say when your samples are large, you can kind of get away with it. Your underlying distribution doesn't have to be normal. Lots of textbooks state that. So when your sample is more than, I don't know, everyone prevaricates when it comes to defining the difference in a large sample and a small sample. But by the time you get more than about 60, then you're into large sample territory. And the minimum sample size I had for these was about 120. So I feel reasonably comfortable with that. But of course, one thing that you can do as a kind of belt and braces approach to this is you can try and transform the data to see if you can get a normal distribution. So what I did is I said, well, what if we log transform the length of stay data? So go to those raw 3,246 values, those length of stay values, and do a log transformation of them, and then plot them. And what you get is a distribution that's approximately normal. What was interesting about this is that when you then do the funnel plot based on log transformation, you get the two consultants who were clearly had a longer length of stay. They also show as this, but the third consultant becomes a different third consultant, interestingly, when you do the log transform, which I kind of quite like, actually. If that happens to you when you do this kind of belt and braces approach, because it emphasizes the fact that you're not doing this to name and shame consultants, you're doing it to identify the adjacent possible. So in a way, you're kind of saying, I don't really care who these consultants are. What we want to find out is an improved length of stay possible? So there are ways around the statistical thing. And another way around it would be to use bootstrapping as well, which will probably be an even better way of getting around that problem. And then the fourth, if I just go back to my checklist here, the fourth one is this, which I think is interesting. This is the point I'm going to close on, which is that when you, and I've realized I've got a typo. I've got to amend that, because that was, there we go, short, that should say. There you go, live correction. The long and the short of it. So one of the things that this clinical director in this example said was, let's have a look at what the difference is between the 12 consultants who have a length of stay of 8.9 and the other 3. Okay, so let's have a look at those differences. So let's see, we go. There we go, that was it. So if you look at the 3 consultants and just isolate them, then they have a combined length of stay of 13.3. And what I've done here with the vertical axis is so that I can show both of these graphs in harmony, I've changed it from being a count of their workload to its percentage of their workload, so that we can compare these two. But obviously the sample size for the red graph is quite a lot smaller than the sample size for the blue graph. But it's the shape of the distribution that matters, and then the shape of the majority consultant thing is over there on the right. 8.9 days is the average of that. And one of the things that I've observed, and I've done this a few times with a few different hospitals and a few different specialties, is that in general, what you tend to find or what I've tended to find, is that when you is that the crucial difference between the long length of stay consultants and the short length of stay is not where you'd expect it to be. Most people, I think, would say, "Oh, it'll be at the right hand end of the distribution." Well, there is a bit. You can see that the right hand column for the red graph. So that final column in each graph is the patients who've stayed longer than 56 days. Sorry, I should have explained that. So the length of stay is being measured on the horizontal axis from 1 day, 0 to 1 days in the first column, and then longer than 56 days in the right-hand column. And you can see that column, that final right-hand column, is smaller in the graph on the right than it is on the graph on the left. But it's not, I don't think that's the most noteworthy feature. It seems to me that the most noteworthy feature of the difference is that the 12 consultants who have a lower length of stay, it's what they're doing with their short stay cohorts that seems to be the difference between short length of stay and long length of stay. And that, it seems to me, is also useful because it helps to counter, if you like, the argument that you often get when you're talking to clinical teams about length of stay, that oh, we can't do anything about length of stay because it's all about, you know, delayed discharges and patients waiting for social care. So it's out of our hands, I'm afraid. So off you go, and you know, nice try, but you know, sod off. Which is, you know, a typical response that you get. But it's hard to sustain that argument when it turns out that the difference between 8.9 and 13.3 is mainly in how you're dealing with the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 day patients. That there's a way of doing that seems to do that. So that's basically what I wanted to do. I wanted to sort of put that out there, exploratory style. As I say, I've dabbled with it. I'm keen to explore it further, and I've started conversations with a few different consultants on sort of social media to see if anyone is interested in this. But yeah, just keen to know what people's views are. So I'll stop sharing my screen and see if people have any comments or questions.
Thanks, Neil. That's a really nice walk through sort of how to prepare that type of data and some ideas on how it can be used. And I'm just looking at I've got one comment. Sorry, I think I just talked a load of rubbish then because I was trying to do two things at one time. There's a comment in the chat and it says it feels like a reconstruction of every meeting with clinicians where length of stay comes up, and I'm sure that's probably going to be something that people might relate to, I suppose. I mean, when people do talk about length of stay quite a lot, don't they? But I think there's I think what you're presenting here is a different approach, or is an approach which may be more palatable, understandable by those who are needing to understand it and do something with it. So
Yeah, I think
what do you think?
there's also a background point I would make, Rachel, which is that you know, I have a lot of conversations with a lot of different doctors in different hospitals about length of stay. The most dominant theme is that they don't see their length of stay data.
Yeah.
So the first thing that you say when you speak to doesn't matter whether it's a clinical director or an ordinary consultant, and it doesn't matter whether it's generally speaking, surgical specialties tend to be clearer about the length of stay than medical specialties.
Yeah.
Medical specialties are just often just kept in the dark. Or what happens is that you so again, this is a conversation I had with a friend of mine who's a physician. And she said, "Well, we know what our length of stay is. It's about 7.5 days." And I said, "Well, knowing that it's about 7.5 days isn't really any good if the difference between 7.9 and 6.9 is the difference between night and day in patient flow terms. You need to know your decimal. You need to know your length of stay to 2 decimal places, and you need to be used to sort of forensically dissecting it, you know, by gender and by case mix and by time of day and by season and all the rest of it, to look for possibilities rather than just accepting that it is what it is. I think so. So part of my so part of this is about saying, well, I think these conversations about length of stay in clinical teams don't happen often enough, I think. one of my themes.
So there may be a supposition that they do happen, but clearly they don't happen, or it's variable. I imagine some trusts routinely sort of share this type of information, but others don't. Like you say, there might be some specialties that are more that may be more than others. I'm going to share my screen because I've got a few comments and a couple of questions on Slido as well, so we can just turn to those. Let's see what we got on here. So they come. The order is that they come in at the bottom. So one or two of the ones at the bottom would have been while you were presenting.
Okay.
So I'm happy for you to just pick and choose which you'd like to respond to.
Yeah, I don't understand the one at the bottom. It's I mean, I can see why that may be useful if you're tracking length of stay.
I guess if there's movement
in real time.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm assuming that when an analyst is analyzing length of stay, retrospectively, so it's a meeting to look at last month's, the length of stay of last month's discharges or last quarters or whatever, that they've already got a method in place for making sure that they don't double count patients and that they can join different elements of the stay together. An example about the case mix complexity in relation to length of stay. So one of the things so I'm conscious that in this particular example that I showed there, that was a relatively clear-cut one. That was a hospital which organizes itself by specialty. Yeah. A lot of hospitals don't do that. They organize themselves into kind of ward firms, and each ward firm might be, well, there is a kind of special interest in, I don't know, cardiology, but we also have a lot of general medical patients as well. So what you might want to do is quite a bit of discussion with them to say, well, we've got two separate workloads here. One is the sort of specialty workload, which will maybe park because maybe different consultants are not comparable because consultant A does these types of cases and consultant B, but maybe the general work is comparable. So find a way of separating that off so that you've got something that is comparable. So that's one thought I've had about the case mix complexity. And again, involve and invoke. So again, if I go back to my NHS career, many years ago, often did that kind of thing with the clinical coding supervisor on hand as well, talking to the doctors so that they can be clear about what gets coded as what and what's not. The 30-day mortality and readmission measures is significant because, as I say, that would be a reason why length of stay could be so long. If your length of stay was statistically significantly longer than the average, but your 30-day mortality and readmissions were statistically significantly lower, then you'd be perfectly within your rights to say, look, leave me alone, for goodness sake. Similar piece of work using discrete event simulation for mental health acute wards in Lothian. Longitude is highly skewed, and the skew is a bit of an issue. So I'm hoping that skew, in general, what I find is that, well, two methods. One is that a log transformation often sorts that out and gets it so that it's approximately normal so that you can do that. And then the second thing is bootstrapping. So just take lots of random samples of your data and then plot the sample means, because the central limits theorem takes care of that so that you've got normal distributions and you can do whatever comparisons you want using standard error. So both of those methods, I think, work pretty well in terms of getting around that kind of, but it's not a normal distribution, I can't compare them. The analysis, the barriers, how the data presenter are getting clinical buy-in. Ooh, that's a good question. That's a question that's close to my heart. So I don't think the analysis itself is the barrier, because if you've got clinical buy-in, a lot of the analysis kind of problems will be ironed out. You'll have a clinical director or a consultant saying, oh, remember to exclude these, remember to include these, remember to check for this, remember to check for that. So all of those checks and balances would be kind of resolved if you have clinical buy-in. The thing that's difficult, it seems to me, is this whole kind of, it's very threatening to present data to
can be
teams.
Personal.
Yeah, it is. It's. I think I've talked to you before, Rachel. Do you remember I talked to you a few years ago about that book that I read by Jer Thorpe, and he talks about using data as a verb, that that you can, if people feel dated because they're feeling judged by the data,
Yes.
then you're not
Yeah.
going to get a meaningful discussion about it. So a lot of this is about, I would never do this. I would never be bold. I mean, I'm pretty bold, but I wouldn't be bold enough to do this on my own to a
Yeah.
clinical team. I would want to be co-presenting this in a
Yes.
room with ideally the clinical director or a sponsoring clinician to deal with the brickbats associated with comparison. It's a double-edged thing because I also know from speaking to doctors that doctors are also kind of comparison is sort of thing is a second nature thing.
They understand it.
This idea.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
their language in a way, isn't it?
it is. Yeah. So, but I do, how the data is presented is fees. It was probably the biggest barrier. I had a conversation with an analyst friend of mine, and we came up with this idea that you would need to be like a consultant whisperer
I like that.
to take a
Yeah.
leaf from that Robert Redford film ages ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you can find the right way of presenting it and the right way of words to do it, then maybe you can do it so that you're using this data in the spirit in which it's intended,
Yeah.
and not for judging.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking though, it's all going to depend on those. It's all about relationships, isn't it?
Yeah,
You
it
need to
is.
like getting like you're saying, getting the buy-in, people seeing that this isn't meant to be threatening. The whole process isn't meant to be threatening, and sort of and that people are being understood and it's fair and it's you understand the
Yeah,
data and how it's going to be used and everything. It's not just about presenting like a rather excellent piece of analysis which demonstrates this and this, because that would just that'd be quite
yeah.
that wouldn't work, would it? It is about the
Yeah,
relationships.
it is. And one thing I've observed as well, thinking about times when this maybe hasn't worked in the past. So many years ago, I did a similar-ish type thing. It wasn't length of stay that I was comparing. It was acute medicine discharge rates from the acute medical unit. So
Okay.
it's a similar, it's very league tableizable
Yeah.
indicator. And I remember doing this and presenting it to the clinical director for acute medicine and saying, here's the 12 consultants, whatever, here's their rate. And I'd anonymize the consultants. And the clinical director said, oh, no, we don't need to anonymize them. Let's take them to a meeting, let's name them.
Yeah.
So I did, because that was me getting my instruction from
Yeah.
but the danger of that is that just because the clinical director thinks it's okay,
Uh-huh.
that doesn't necessarily mean that all of their 12 colleagues think that. So it's like you again, the game is just messed up, isn't it? If even just one of them has a problem with it, because then
Yeah.
the meeting gets poisoned like that. The point about this is that it's about trying to see genuine
Yeah.
improvement possibilities.
Yeah.
There's
Absolutely.
a point about discharge destination is a good point as well,
Yeah.
because it's possible that patients that, for example, were discharged because they were transferred to another hospital might have shorter length of stays than patients who were discharged home, or patients who were discharged needing a package of care and all that kind of stuff. So that's good.
Yeah.
Again, I'm all for this, because I think this, people should be looking in more forensic detail. Clinicians would like to know it more, but we often can't find it. Yeah. The tricky thing for this is the interaction between consultants and handover patients and its complexity. For the funnel plot, it seems to me that um, I'll add another tricky thing to that, which is that in all of the conversations I've had with consultants about getting the raw data, it often takes 2 or 3 iterations to get it. Like it's about what to include, what to exclude. So, for example, with that example there, what was it? We had to exclude any time they spent in the discharge lounge. We had to exclude any time that those patients spent prior in the acute medical unit. So they were only interested in the bit that was in the downstream general medicine bit. They needed reassurance that I'd glued together ward stays where patient went consecutive through wards. And some of these were tricky. And then we had to
Yeah.
have a special rule about what do you do when a patient goes from general medicine, spends 2 days in ICU and then comes back to general medicine. Do we
Yeah.
include, are you with me, right? So a lot of these things will be very bespoke. And if the general default setting for the way that information is presented is on some kind of dashboard with generic algorithms, then I think clinicians will be often a bit disillusioned when they see that data and it doesn't sort of stack up. So I
Yeah.
think that we've got to be quite picky about this in terms of making sure that the definitions, as I say, the inclusions and exclusions match what that clinical team
Yeah, the
advises
reality,
them.
the pathway, what's
Yeah,
happening, and the something they
yeah,
recognize. Otherwise, the credibility is kind of gone, it's gone out the window, hasn't it? Because they don't
yeah.
recognize that as describing what they do in real life. There's a comment here that you just mentioned funnel pots, but so clinicians would like to know about would like to know more.
So I think that
Particularly,
means I think the it there is about length of stay data, I think. Yeah.
mm,
But we often can't find it. I think that's right. I agree with that. I think that very often length of stay data is done, oh, it's like just for a ward.
mm,
So if you know as a clinician that patients often move from ward to ward in the course of their single stay, you're just going to look at that and say, well, that's just nonsense. What can I do with that? And unless the data people understand that cold-faced reality of how patient journeys work, then it won't be done.
so there's obviously a clinician in the room who wants to know more. He or she is in fact feeling that this would be something that would help them in their
Yeah.
practice or understand what they're doing and how they, I guess, the team or their colleagues work together. So we've got there's a nice one here which starts off with great presentation.
I know, I like
Um,
that. Can we dwell on that one?
I am. I mean, it's nice and long as well, so I can't read quickly.
No, that's good. I'm so glad that the second point as well is actionable. So yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, the point of what I'm trying to do here is to say, look, um, because so often I think we think about length of stay as something that's beyond our control.
yeah,
What I'm trying to do is nudge it into that actionable, adjacent, possible arena. Because across some of the common assumptions about what it might take to influence length of stay, is it worth introducing some of these concepts to improvement professionals as well as clinicians? Oh yeah, that's a good point as well. So I haven't thought about that, but yeah. Um, Often fixing these issues are delegated to an improvement department, maybe wrongly.
well, this is
Yeah,
this
maybe
is it.
wrongly.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
it's a
I
bit of
wonder.
both.
So if you think about the way that I was phrasing, my so yeah, I told you it was like I'd like genericized several case studies into
Yeah.
one, but every single one of them, what they had in common was that it was a piece of work that was co-designed and
Yeah.
co-delivered, if you like, by me
Mm.
and a consultant. So I think what we've got here is maybe a consult and an improvement person as well. Um, and an analyst. I think it's dangerous to do this just on your own. I really do think it is. I mean, you would have to, unless you're standing, your brand within your hospital was already very, very strong, um, so that people just automatically knew that you'd got the data right from the start. Um, I think
But
it will be tricky.
but there is something about it. Obviously you do have improvement departments. You do have sort
Yeah,
of it's getting that balance right, isn't it? It's sort of micro macro, isn't it? It's something about there is something I can do with understanding my own data, my colleagues' data, in conjunction with what maybe the trust are trying to do or the department is trying to do, because and there could be like a feedback loop which says, yes, this is feasible, this is possible, this
yeah,
is what I think about it, because I now understand, I now have confidence in the information that you're sharing with me. So I think what you're saying, so this is the adjacent possible. So people on the ground, they can probably see things that can't be seen on a bigger scale. So it's
yes,
both sides, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, that Rachel. So again, it's this idea that you can only see these distributions, these length of stay distributions, by looking retrospectively at what happened last month or last quarter or last year. If your focus is exclusively on the sort of operational here and now, and all of your efforts to reduce length of stay are that you look at the patients who are already in hospital and can we
Yeah,
just get them home 3 or 4 hours earlier or a couple of days earlier, then you're missing so much of the potential for improvement
yeah, the big
because you're not
picture.
looking at the yeah, I think that's a
Okay, we've got time for just these. Just a couple more before I sort of have a couple of words to say about up and coming huddles. So someone saying here is that they think it sits at the
yeah, it
intersection.
does.
I love that word. Of analysis and improvement transformation. So it's making this person think about some of the techniques that they would use with improvement colleagues. So you're right about
Yeah,
who's in the room to identify opportunities.
yeah, definitely. I think it is. This is one of the points I'm definitely taking home with me now. Taking home, I'm already at home. Is this idea of widening my the people I talk to about this to improvement professionals specifically, because it may be something that they haven't possibly thought about. I don't know, but that's definitely food for thought. And then I think that again is reiterating that, isn't it, that final point?
Yeah, very, very important. And it's nice to see that those people in the room as well today, so that they're obviously attracted by the topic and the importance of it, and maybe see some opportunities for taking a little bit more control, or taking a different viewpoint, involving clinicians maybe in a different way. They might be pleasantly surprised how what an impact that can have as well. Okay, well, I think we've just got a couple of minutes to go, so I'm going to stop sharing my my screen. I will share my other screen, but whilst I'm doing that, I'll just say thank you ever so much, Neil, for that. I've really enjoyed having you talk about those, the way that you approach this, and the way you did it as well. I think I like the way you
That's
did
great.
it.
Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure.
I know I'm an analyst, but I like it broken down. Like I'd be the one who had to read something 16 times, even if I'd done it before. If I'm revisiting something, it's done it, but over a week ago. So that's really helpful of you to break it down like that. I like that. So thank you very much. And I do hope you're going to come again. I thought I stopped sharing. I haven't, have I? I hope you can come back and give us some updates as well. I'll share with you anything that we didn't cover. I just shared the same screen again, didn't I? What's a nana? I will share it with you, Neil, if it's okay. Anything we didn't cover, because there's one or two comments which might be helpful to you, and there's one or two. I'm sure there's a couple of questions that I didn't get to. If I could share those after, if you can maybe have a look at them after the meeting. Okay, if I can just look at up and coming events and opportunities, and I know for well without clicking my next button that I'm missing something off here. So this is a very you'll like this one. Neil, you should come to this one. So this is a strategy unit insights session about failure demand in healthcare. So when something isn't done quite right, at one point it can explode into like like so many other activities and people, and I know from personal experience, because something wasn't done right in the first place, the impact it has is and can be immense, both in terms of the cost to an individual and organizations as well. And just looking at the next few huddles, so building on that, so the following week after that, we're going to have a deeper look at failure demand in healthcare. So this is about how we're going to measure it, how we're going to, what you can do about it. And again, I think you'll be interested in that as well. And here's some of the other huddles that are coming up, and we got lots more besides. This one in July, decision quality and the use of AI in clinical decision making. So Deb Lessard is Director of Corporate Risk Management in Pittsburgh. I couldn't spell it before I met her and realized it had I shouldn't say all this, should I? I like to sound quite intelligent sometimes. Anyway, so we've got all these things lined up, and it'd be great for people to join us there, but we now hit 12 o'clock. So thank you again, Neil. Very much enjoyed the session, and thank you for sharing that with us. Somebody wants your email. I'll provide that to them if that's okay. And and thank you everybody for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of the weather while it's here, and the slightly cooler weather at the weekend, if that's more palatable. Thanks again. See you in 2 weeks, everyone.